Hello everyone, this is Professor Hasselman, and in this lecture we're going to be talking about the wars of religion that erupted after Protestantism started to take hold in Europe. So how and why did Protestantism spread and take root in some parts of Europe, but not in the others? Now, as we've seen, many princes in the Holy Roman Empire, especially in northern Germany, embraced the Reformation. They did so because of their humanist educations, religious convictions, greed for church lands, or a desire to stick it to the emperor. Now, in contrast, such places as Bavaria and Austria, more directly under the emperor's control, stayed Catholic. Now, the emperor spent the next half century trying to bring the Protestant princes to heel, culminating in the War of the Schmalkaldic League from 1546 to 1552. But the Peace of Passau, reaffirmed in Augsburg in 1555, granted Lutheran states the free exercise of their religion. As a result, the emperor remained weak, and Germany remained divided in religion and politics. Now, Protestantism was embraced by the ambitious monarchs of Sweden and Denmark. Switzerland was a federation of self-governed city-states, and because there was no central control, urban areas, dominated by literate merchants, were able to embrace Protestantism. In 1520, Ulrich Zwingli, or Huldreich Zwingli, persuaded the merchants on the town council in Zurich to embrace Protestantism. In Geneva, John Calvin sought to create a theocracy. Geneva embraced Protestant liturgical reforms. The city provided rigorous public religious education for all. Pastors and other parish officials were elected. Individual households and personal behavior were closely monitored by a consistory of clergy and lay people. Notorious sinners were excommunicated and even put to death. And finally, Calvin founded a university that trained preachers who became especially influential in France and Scotland. Now, Protestant ideas were at first tolerated by the monarchy in France, but after placards attacking the Mass were attached to church doors on the 18th of October 1534, or the Affair of the Placards, the monarchy began a crackdown on Protestants, soon to be known as Huguenots, who fled to Geneva. Now, the Huguenots returned in 1550 and drew up a platform based on the Geneva model. They became especially popular in cities among merchants, in part because of the Protestant emphasis on literacy. Now, the attempts of the monarchy and the Catholic Church to suppress them led to the French Wars of Religion, which lasted from 1552 to 1598. France was increasingly divided into a Huguenot minority, led by the Bourbon family, headed by Henry of Bourbon, a Catholic majority led by the Guise family, and a royal house of Valois, which was caught in the middle. The 1572 murder of Protestant leaders in their beds at the St. Bartholomew Days massacre led to 2 decades of sporadic civil war, and a France too weakened by internal division to play a major role in the international stage. Now, the Low Countries, Netherlands, Flanders, Luxembourg, were divided directly by Charles V, or ruled, directly by Charles V, after 1554 by Philip, eventually known as Philip II of Spain. Now, the literate merchant classes embraced Protestantism, and by the mid-16th century, the northern part, Netherlands, was mostly Protestant, and the southern part, Flanders, which eventually becomes Belgium, Roman Catholic. Now, in England, Henry VIII, unable to secure a Catholic divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England in the 1530s. From 1547 to 1553, Edward VI's ministers pursued Protestantism aggressively. Between 1553 and 1558, Mary restored Catholicism and launched a persecution, burning 286 Protestants at the stake. Now, Elizabeth instituted the Act of Uniformity in 1559, which abolished the authority of the Pope and named herself Supreme Governor of the Church of England, but retained bishops, vestments, and many old holidays. Now, die-hard Catholics tried to maintain their faith in secret, and strict Protestants sought to purify the settlement of Catholic rituals and practices. They became known as Puritans. Now, thanks in part to Elizabeth's 45-year reign, most English men and women seem to have accepted the compromise settlement. Now, Scotland, ruled by the House of Stuart, had always been poorer and less centrally governed than England. After the death of James V in 1547, Scotland was effectively ruled by Mary of Guise as regent for her infant daughter, Mary, Queen of Scots. By 1557, Mary of Guise began to prosecute Protestants. In 1559, a group of Scottish nobles and lairds, or landowners, called the Lords of the Congregation, rebelled against the two Marys, abolished papal jurisdiction and the Mass, and began to establish a Presbyterian church structure. The French sent troops to aid Mary of Guise. Elizabeth sent help to the Protestants. In 1560, Mary of Guise died, and all parties signed the Treaty of Edinburgh, promising joint rule and religious toleration. Now, from 1567 to 68, the Scottish nobility deposed Mary, Queen of Scots, in favor of her infant son, who became King James VI. Now, Scotland remained Protestant, eventually embracing a Presbyterian church settlement. Now, the Catholic response, known as the Catholic Reformation, or the Counter-Reformation, was slow in coming and consisted of three parts. First, the Council of Trent, which convened to respond to the Reformation. The Council of Trent tacitly conceded Luther's point regarding morality and discipline by calling for a moral, well-educated clergy. It rejected, however, the Protestant critique of church doctrine, reaffirming the authority of the Pope and tradition, the sanctity of the priesthood, the seven sacraments, salvation by faith and good works, purgatory, indulgences, and the use of images, and clerical celibacy. Now, the Jesuits, the second thing that happened during the Catholic Reformation, the Jesuits were formed by Ignatius of Loyola in 1534 and recognized by the Pope in 1540. Now, the Jesuits became leaders in humanistic education, immediately developing a following with ruling elites. They went as missionaries to China, Japan, the coast of Africa, Canada, and South America. They also went to European countries, either as advisors to Catholic princes or to minister to Catholic minorities in Protestant countries. In both cases, the Jesuits involved themselves in political plots, often supported by the power and wealth of the Spanish Empire. Third, the Spanish Crusade, led by Philip II, was an attempt to stamp out Protestant heretics wherever he found them. Now, the wars of religion reached their height thanks to the efforts of Philip II. Phase 1 lasted from 1567 to 1608. The revolt of the Netherlands began in the 1560s after Philip II imposed the Inquisition and backed the Spanish army. In 1574, Antwerp was sacked, known as the Spanish Fury, and the port never fully recovered. Now, after the Dutch received assistance from Elizabeth I in 1585, Philip decided to send the Spanish Armada against England in 1588. The defeat of the Armada was a tremendous propaganda victory and confidence booster for England. Despite the loss of thousands of men and about 60 ships, the disaster of the Armada did not seriously weaken Spain. This defeat was only the beginning of a war that would last another 17 years, spread to 3 continents and 2 oceans, and drain the treasuries of England, Spain, and France. In 1589, Henry III, the last Valois king of France, was assassinated. The next in line for his throne was the Protestant leader of the Huguenots, Henry of Bourbon. He was opposed by the Catholic League and Philip II. But by 1598, Henry IV, supported by Elizabeth, had defeated his enemies in France. He appeased Catholics by becoming one, and he reassured Huguenots by granting a toleration via the Edict of Nantes, which was declared in 1598. By 1605, both Philip II and Elizabeth were dead, and the Spanish monarchy had declared bankruptcy 3 times. Peace with England came at the Treaty of London in 1605, and Spain recognized the Dutch Republic in 1608. Phase 2 comprised the 30 Years' War, which lasted from 1618 to 1648. The war began when the Protestants of Bohemia revolted from the Holy Roman Emperor, a Habsburg released to the King of Spain, threw the emperor's representatives out of the window, which was known as the Defenestration of Prague, and asked the Elector Palatine, a small prince on the Rhine, to be their king in 1618. Now, the Holy Roman Empire and Spain responded by seizing Bohemia and the Palatine. The result was a general European war over religion and the balance of power. The Catholic side included Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and Bavaria, and the Protestant side included Saxony and the other North German states, Sweden, the Netherlands, and France. Now, for 30 years, armies crisscrossed Central Europe, leaving devastation in their wake. Finally, the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 enshrined the position cujus regio ejus religio. That is, the religion of the state is the religion of the ruler. Now, the wars of religion had significant consequences. Germany would remain weak and divided well into the 19th century. Spain, saddled with debts from more than a century of trying to fight heretics on all fronts, began a slow, long decline. England stayed out of it, and after a period of instability, would emerge a major player at the end of the 17th century. And France, having achieved a degree of dynastic stability, would become the leading power in Europe. Europeans finally agreed to live and let live, more or less, on the issue of religion. With such an intensely rational settlement in place, it is no accident that the remainder of the 17th century would be regarded as the Age of Reason.